Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplanty Goodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it around me and in front of me today. And in front of me is the plant that I want to talk about today, or the type of plant that I want to talk about today. And I'll bring it up so you can see it a bit better. This is a Caladium spring fling. And you might be saying to yourself, especially if you're watching this video when I've uploaded it, but it's almost Christmas time, how is the Caladium still going? Easy answer is, I'll give you my best guess as to what I'm doing in order for this plant to still be growing even in the winter months. And for those who are new to Caladiums, Caladiums, as a rule of thumb, generally will tend to go dormant and essentially lose all their foliage for the winter months in order to then be repotted in the summer months and then to sprout up again, and the cycle kind of essentially continues. But the one thing that a lot of people tend to forget about these plants is in their natural environments where you don't get a lot of seasonal change, they will not necessarily lose their foliage and go into dormancy to then come back again. Now, the one thing that you might be able to notice about this spring fling, and I'll show you this leaf, which is a bit more traditional of what it would look like in the summer months, and I'll bring it in a bit closer, and even then you can see that a lot of that pink blush has kind of dissipated now. There's a bit of a pink blush on this one, but you can see a lot of them are a bit more green. Normally this plant would be almost a brilliant white with the green veination, and then the white will eventually turn pink. This has become a lot more green in the winter months, and my best estimate for this is because there is less light available, and I've done a different video about lighting and houseplants. Do check it out, it's on my channel, and I talk about natural light and I talk about artificial light, and volume of light is something I have mentioned previously. So volume of light isn't the only thing. Obviously you need intensity of light, so just make sure that your plant is getting the right type of light. So if it needs bright indirect light, it's getting bright indirect light. But coming back to volume of light is something that will change between summer and winter months. In the summer months or in the growing season, you'll have sunlight for a lot longer, so for more hours in the day essentially, than you will in the winter. Winter, you tend to get the longest nights, summers you tend to get the longest days. It kind of makes sense that there will be less light volume available to the plant because there's less hours of daylight in the winter months. And essentially what I think is happening with this specific Caladium is it's going a bit greener because it's trying harder to photosynthesize. Now with some other Caladiums where I've seen that they were kind of wilting down and slowing down, yes, I have kind of chopped off the foliage and essentially put that bulb or corm, essentially the tuber that they grow from, it's like a little potato, to sleep for the winter. And essentially the way that you would do that in the winter is you'd obviously take off all the foliage, you'd remove all the soil, you'd let it fully dry out, then you'd put it in something like a paper bag, put it somewhere where it's going to be dry and relatively warm, and leave that there until the springtime. Usually around March or April is when you want to be potting them up. I have also done a previous video, I'm pretty sure I've done it on here and I haven't done it on my Instagram. If I have done it on my Instagram, I do encourage you to come join Instagram as well. I've got my Instagram handle in the description down below. I do some informational reels and I'll do updates on some of my larger specimen plants. But back to this, is after obviously you've got it in that tuber stage, something that I found that was a huge game changer for me last year, and annoyingly I didn't do it when I was taking the tubers out of the soil. I have tried it now this time around, is making sure that you go, it's a bit like a potato. So you know how a potato has got the eyes that you go and kind of take out before you cook it? It's very similar. Take off some of those points. And as I mentioned, it's on the previous video, you can see what I'm talking about a bit more clearly. You will get more growth points because it won't just be focusing on that one or two major growth areas that it had before, and you'll get a bushier, wider plant at that point. Not necessarily larger, but bushier. So something to bear in mind. But back to growing this in the winter. nothing has changed in terms of my care for this plant. The watering has decreased in terms of frequency, but again, I will use my moisture meter with this plant to only make sure that I'm watering it when it needs to be watered. So again, go on regular Caladium watering cycles that you would do in the summer. It just becomes that the time between watering becomes longer in the winter months. I have moved this to a brighter location now, so even though the volume of light isn't there, it's getting more light when it is getting the light, so it's still going quite strong. None of it seems to be dying back, and I am leaving this. I'm also leaving this in a situation where it remains warm for the majority of the day and night. My conservatory doesn't have a huge fluctuation between day and night temperatures. There's a bit of a drop at night because I do like to give the plants a bit of a rest. But yeah, it seems to still be going strong, and I will leave it as is. This is the first time I'm trying this experiment, so I don't necessarily know if it's going to do this, it's going to survive all the way through the winter, but I don't see a reason why it shouldn't. If the temperature is high enough, if the light levels are remaining relatively okay for this plant, it's got some decent level of humidity because by default it's in my plant room, there will be humidity in here. But other than that, I've not really changed too much about it. I'm even still slightly fertilizing this. I'm not fertilizing this as often as I would have done in the summer months of the growing period, but I'm still seeing, let me show you, I am still seeing some new growth. It might be small growth, but I am still seeing some new growth coming in on this plant. So I'm essentially letting it do its thing. The other thing that I found really useful for most of my Caladiums, and obviously I've had them for over a year now, so I've essentially made them dormant in the winter and then replanted them. I've been able to control it a bit better in my own aroid, airy soil mix, rather than the soil mix that might come with an established Caladium if you're buying it from a plant store, which tends to a lot of the times just be straight up coco coir. It will remain moist for a bit longer, and these plants, very similar to the Alocasia and Colocasia, will generally be growing around areas where there's water, so around rivers or lakes and things like that. So they do like to have some moisture in their soil. This is definitely not a plant that you want to be drying out entirely between waterings. But I found that the straight up coco coir just kept it a bit too moist for a bit too long. So actually, since moving most of my Caladiums into my aroid mix in terms of soil, I've been able to better control how they grow, their growing pattern, and also reduce that risk of them being wet for too long and getting root rot. The other thing I will say is I've never really had any pests on most of my Caladiums. That's quite impressive. I don't know if other people have had pests. I would imagine very similar to the Alocasia and Colocasia, probably spider mites would love these plants. I've not had that problem with any of my Caladiums, even now in the winter with this one that is growing. I do have another Caladium. Ironically enough, I would have assumed that that one would have done better in the winter months, but I did let it summer outdoors and I didn't bring it in early enough. That was my Caladium frog in a blender, which is a horrendous name for it, especially because I used to have poison dart frogs. But so it was the plant with the name that should not be named in a house with frogs. But that one had a lot more green on it, and I was expecting that one to do a bit better. That one has gone into full dormancy. I've left it there. I've kind of pulled it back in. I've even left it in the soil. I want to try a bit more of an experiment because it's a plant that you can get a bit more readily these days. But with this one, it seems to be doing well. So I'm just going to let it do its thing. So as I mentioned before, a few things that you might want to take away from this video is increase light levels if you can, because they're not getting as many hours of light. If you want to keep your Caladium going in the winter, accept the fact that it might just change in terms of its morphology and its look. It might become a bit more green. It might lose some of that beautiful coloration that you liked about this plant to begin with, because it's trying to make sure that it's absorbing as much of that light as possible. Make sure you've got it in a well draining soil mix. I obviously would not suggest that if you've got one that's still going to repot it now. This might be something for next year, because if you repot it now, it probably would stress it enough that it would probably go into dormancy, potentially, I would imagine. So have it in a well-draining soil mix. If it's still growing and you're managing to, and this is the other thing, remember to reduce the watering frequency. Just make sure that you're checking that soil and only watering when needed. So I think this plant was my spring fling, because it had so very little green on it, didn't need even frequent watering in the summer. I think this was getting watered every 14 days. No, actually I lie. When it got really, really warm and really, really sunny, this was maybe getting watered every 7 days. But I think this is down to every 21 days now. So every 3 weeks this is getting watered and it's doing fine. Reduce that, but still fertilize if you're seeing some active growth, because you're assisting that plant by being able to absorb some of that moisture and some of that nutrition from the fertilizer that you're adding in. But make sure that you maybe reduce the strength of your fertilizer. And yeah, and hopefully that would mean that you might be able to keep your caladium growing through the winter. And I'm assuming this might be kind of obvious to a lot of you, but if you got a plant that survived the winter with all of its leaves, there is a bigger chance that in the summer, when the growing season starts coming back again in the spring, you'll get even more foliage and you'll get bigger foliage because that plant hasn't necessarily stopped growing. I know there are two camps of people that say that some of these plants do need a dormancy in order to come back stronger in the summer months. As I said, first time I'm trying it, so I will probably update you in the future and let you know if that worked, or even if being able to keep this alive through the entirety of the winter months has worked. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed. If you've got any questions, comments, do drop them down below. As I said, this is the first time I'm trying it, but I would be more than happy to kind of explain what I'm doing in a bit more detail. But yeah, hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.